I became very good at getting the organization's name in the news, and that was a way to sort of manipulate the press to promote the group. You know, we knew they wouldn't say anything good about the group, but from the extremist viewpoint, it's like, hey, if we get our name mentioned in the papers or on the TV, then there's going to be people that see through their media lies and will join us. And typically that happened. So when there was no press or no protesters, the morale dropped of the individuals that were attending. And my worry became, hey, nobody might not show up for the next one because we're not clashing with the communists and the Antifa out in the streets. Is these extremist groups actually thrive off one another? And this is when each side goes further to the extreme on each side, and it ends up pulling people further out to those extremes. So Antifa, they were infiltrating. Big infiltration came when we were holding a press conference in downtown St. Paul, and it ended up in this big street fight. So I was like, after that, got to figure out ways to infiltrate them. And I would say the most successful person that we had that infiltrated the other side was a non-white person, was somebody that was black, that got very close to the top leadership in Antifa here, and they had no idea.
When you were infiltrating, what type of information would you try to gather, or would you just try to do as much damage as possible?
Put misinformation in there. So there was other little tricks that were being done to do that as well. Like when they'd have tip lines or things like that, we'd say, "Hey, here's an anonymous tip. The Nazis are going to be meeting," and then we give them a address on the other side of town. They knew we were coming, sending false messages into these groups to get them to go run to the other opposite side of town and do little things like that to throw them off of our tail.
What would be, if you could imagine the utopia, if your goal has been achieved, you've achieved the goals that you want to achieve with this organization, how would the society look like?
Well, it would have been an all-white National Socialist Society. So that's basically, so anybody that wasn't white would have been deported. Anybody that was homosexual wouldn't be there. Anybody that had mixed race or anything like that wouldn't have been there. It would have been a all-white homeland that was just National Socialist, preferably. That's the way I looked at it back then.
So what I'm gonna say is,
Oh, and by the way, I saw you were on the Joe Rogan podcast. How is that like? Does he fly you guys in to interview or what?
Yeah. Yeah, he was great. He was really cool. He had like samurai stuff in his front office there, so that drew my attention right away. I was asking questions about that, and last time I'd seen any actual real samurai stuff was in the Detroit Museum of Art for the samurai exhibit that came over from Japan. So, but he was like, "Oh yeah, those swords are hundreds of years old, and so is the armor." So I was all about that. He's a cool guy.
Where did he get it?
I don't know. I didn't ask that.
Ah, come on. So yeah. Anyway, you were a leader of the National Socialist Movement, the NSM, it was called. And that was, I guess, that was the largest, most active neo-Nazi group in the United States. And actually, I've written down some of the things you've said in some of the rallies that you guys were on. So you said, and it was not, what I've noticed is you never really mentioned white superiority or like a white supremacy. But you said the white race in America is becoming a minority very fast. The white people standing here today, standing up on behalf of our people, are amongst the few that have the fortitude to stand for our people. Every time someone stands up and says something pro-white in this country, it's called hate. It's called racism. You said that in a speech at a rally in, it was in 2018, I think it was in Arkansas. And you also said, we are the front line of the fight for a white race. We are the shock troops for the white race. And I think that was a speech in 2017 in Kentucky, right? You actually never called yourself white supremacist, though. What was, when you made these speeches, what was going on? What was going through your brain? Was it trying to recruit people? Was there some sort of motivation for manipulation? Or was what you were saying what you truly believed? And you thought that you were not only doing something bad, but even bringing something positive to the community.
I was an ideologue, so I absolutely believed in what I was fighting for, and I felt like what I was doing was a noble cause, it was an honorable cause, and I think that's something that a lot of people get misconstrued or misunderstand about these movements, is they think, looking at it from the outside looking in, they think, these guys must know that they're doing something bad, they're doing something negative, they're doing something hateful. But the vast majority of the people that are involved in it, they think they are doing something good and noble. Otherwise, they wouldn't fight that hard for it. Simply put, I mean, you look at radicalization across the spectrum; it's very similar. The psychological holds, the psychological pulls, why people are attracted to it. People typically don't join movements, thinking, "Hey, I'm going to be the bad guy," or "I want to be part of something that's ugly and negative and that society doesn't like." Those of us that were involved in it, most if you have got some psychological issues or something, you might be want to be part of something that's just negative and ugly and rebellious or whatever. But the vast majority of the people that were involved in it truly were true believers. I feel, I mean, from my experience leading the National Socialist Movement for 25 years, being involved 27 years, I mean, that's what I took away from it. And I did really want to get into the psychology and understanding of it. And we had to be on the lookout for any new troops, any new recruits that were coming in. You always had to be conscious: is this person sent in by the feds or some other government agency? Are they undercover from the far left, from Antifa or Communist Party type organizations? So these groups were infiltrating, government was infiltrating. So on the flip side, we were doing the same thing. We were infiltrating Antifa groups and things of that nature as well, doing counterintelligence work.
You did capitalize very well in the Trump era, right? I mean, you could really take advantage of that.
I feel like not so much. I mean, Trump was part of the establishment, and he had a lot of ties to Israel and family ties and also political ties. So as a National Socialist, we didn't like him. A lot of the people in the movement didn't care for him. The Democrats and the Republicans were the same party to most of us that were involved in the movement. Now, I mean, and I'm talking, the extreme far right. Not there's a difference between right and far right, extreme right.
Right, right. Now, it's funny because you were not raised with hate. Your fascination actually came from well, you did have family members, basically, who fought in World War II. I know family actually discouraged you from joining an extremist movement. Yeah, that was savage. All that struggle and discouragement, and then you become a Nazi leader and you're in for 27 years. How's that for a rebellion? When you became a leader of the National Socialist Movement at 21, no more than 21, what were your goals for the group?
Well, at that time, it was a fairly small organization. I was particularly attracted to that organization because of its historical connection. It was a continuation of the movement of George Lincoln Rockwell, which when I sought out to join these movements, so I wasn't actually recruited. I wasn't brought in by anybody. I sought the group out and joined on my own. So I wanted something that had the historical ties, something that was closest to the German movement. I found that in the National Socialist Movement. It was pretty small when I first joined. It wasn't very well structured. The organization started by Rockwell's lieutenants in the 1970s. It was like 73, 74 in that time period, so way before my time. But this was an old organization that had historical ties. So when I got involved, I thought, I'm going to be part of this. I had no intentions of being leader or anything like that, but I rose up through the ranks really fast. Yeah, as a young person, I was recruiting a lot of people, bringing people in, and the goal is basically to have like a white homeland. Um, Lofty goal, a big goal for a young person or for the organization, especially when it was so small. But quickly after I was appointed to run it, we start building it out and expanding on the things that I had learned and the tactics of George Lincoln Rockwell, and basically bringing the movement into the streets and creating shock and attracting more fighters to the ranks.
Yeah. How did you view the other extremist groups at that time, like Aryan nations or the KKK?
Most of them that's a complex question because in the movement, like those groups would be considered allied groups, but there's also a lot of infighting. Now, Aryan Nations, I knew Pastor Butler. I was friends with him, so we got along with Aryan Nations pretty well. The Klan is very factionalized in the United States. There's I could tell you I spoke at a Klan thing in I think it was Mississippi or Alabama years back, and I couldn't even tell you the year, but at this particular Klan thing, there was about, I don't know, maybe 100 people, and there was probably about 30 different Klan groups there, if that gives you any idea of how the Klan factions work. So everyone wants to be an Imperial Wizard, so you've got the Imperial Wizard and his Grand Dragon as state leader there, and then, maybe one good-sized clan and 20-something small ones. It's very factionalized, and then they fight amongst each other. The same with the other white nationalist groups. So here in the U.S., some of them will come together for large events or things like that, but behind the scenes, there's a lot of infighting and things like that. So that was something I learned real early on in the movement.
Okay. There's also some critics that say that the NSM actually deliberately tried to provoke conflict at rallies. Did you? I mean, was that a part of the strategy?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, let's put it this way. So we wouldn't go into an area and say we're going to intentionally provoke things, but I mean, you look at the optics and you look at how the organization operated, and it's definitely, if you go anywhere and you're flying a swastika or you're promoting this type of ideology, it's going to present a backlash of sorts. And in a lot of times, some of the areas we picked, like we marched in Washington, D.C. in it was 2008, I think. Marched to the Arch in St. Louis, 2009. Valley Forge historical battlefield, Yorktown historical battlefields, state capitals all across the country. In Kansas at the state capitol, I'm standing up there holding a noose, and that was front page news all over the place. So this organization was very good at I became very good at getting the organization's name in the news and in the press, and that was a way to sort of manipulate the press to promote the group. We knew they wouldn't say anything good about the group, but from the extremist viewpoint, it's like, hey, if we get our name mentioned in the papers or on the TV, then there's going to be people that see through their quote unquote their media lies and will join us. And typically that happens. So anytime there was a rally or an event and there was no press or no counter protesters, which didn't happen too often because most of the time this organization had a press release department and all this sort of thing. So we had lots of press wherever we went. But a couple of times when there was no press or no protesters, the morale dropped of the individuals that were attending. And my worry became, hey, nobody might not show up for the next one because we're not clashing with the communists and the Antifa out in the streets. So the more violent or the more um, confrontation that you're having, the more people would pay attention to it, the more it would be in the press. And then there would be always the people that would miss the events and stuff would say, hey, I didn't know there was going to be a big street battle with the communists. I wouldn't have missed this. I'll be at the next one. So these, believe it or not, and I think a lot of people don't understand this, is these extremist groups actually thrive off one another. So there's something called reciprocal radicalization. And this is when each side um, goes further to the extreme on each side, and it ends up pulling people further out to those extremes. So most of us are here in the middle somewhere, right, left, moderate places, and the extremists are trying to pull more and more people out to those fringes, and more of those people feel pulled to those fringes like, hey, if I don't get involved in this, then there's going to be a communist takeover. Or on the other side, they'll say, hey, if I don't get involved in this, there's going to be a Nazi takeover. So it's a lot of it's based on fear and action and reaction.
Yeah, actually, I talked to one of the Antifa leaders, and he was talking about him being able to be violent, but he always said it was reactionary. It was never a provocation. But yeah, both extremes are basically reactionary in their point of view, you know. And also when you said you were, I mean, it's a numbers game, right? Because even if you have, let's say you have 1,000 people seeing an ad, it may be a bad ad, bad press, but I mean, hell, like 100 are going to be interested, and five might even join. So it's pretty much a numbers game, is what it is. If you're recruiting, no matter what type of press, there's always going to be someone. Always going to be someone, no matter what you're recruiting for. Actually, every time. Uh, and so, what was your personal ideological gateway drug? There's many for people, but what was yours? What pulled you into it initially? Was it like a boiling frog type of effect?
Is something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? Starting therapy can be hard. The right therapist for you may not be in your area. BetterHelp is now sponsoring this podcast. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who is trained to listen and give you helpful, unbiased advice. With BetterHelp, you can have your therapy session as a phone call, as a video chat, or even via messaging if you prefer that. If you think you might benefit from therapy, consider BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/Captainese. Clicking that link helps you support this channel, and it also gives you a 10% off your first month of BetterHelp so you can connect with a therapist and see if it helps you. Again, go to betterhelp.com/Captainese. Clicking that link gives you 10% off your first month of therapy.
Oh, what pulled me into the movement in the first place? What was the interest? So, well, I mean, my first initial interest, come at really young age, like fourth grade in school, because I knew my grandfather had fought in Hitler's army and all that, but and my great uncles as well. So I had this fascination with that part of our family history. And our family was from, or my mom's family was from Prussia, and they had lost their homes and land and everything like that after the war. So I had heard those stories growing up. It wasn't something they like openly talked about, but I mean, my grandparents and my mom, they speak German, and you'd hear it growing up and different things. But I was that kid that was trying to always pull information, like, hey, grandfather, tell me a story about what you did in the war. Tell me some war stories. Like I was that kid that wanted to always hear those kind of battle stories and things like that. So that was the initial fascination. And then so I didn't know really nothing about it. Then as I'm getting older, I'm trying to read more. 16, I'm reading Mein Kampf, which is actually a pretty boring book if you are honest about it. It's a slow read.
Yeah, I've read it. Yeah, yeah, it's just propaganda all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm getting into that stuff now, and then that gives you a scapegoat, and that says this is the cause of all the problems. So I felt like, I'm going to save my country, I'm going to fight and defend my race, and I'm going to stand up for my people. And then there's different things that happened over those years, and I detail a portion of it. I couldn't talk about everything, but I talk about quite a bit of it in my book, and some of the things that took place and what happened, and then how that sort of entrenched the mindset and drove me in further. And you get to this point, I think, at least for me, like after I'd gotten doxxed, after I had was really cemented into it, then you just feel like this is your destiny, and there was no other life choices available, basically.
God damn it. What's because I hear you, it's not that much political, it's definitely ideological. What what psychological needs does extremist ideology fulfill that the mainstream society fails to provide? Because I think extremism often works psychologically before it works politically. It's more about belonging than belief. And it's I mean, what is it? What are people seeking psychologically that join? A sense of belonging, a sense of like a family or something. Yeah.
Well, all of those things, I mean, for me, I think, my journey was a little different, I think, than a lot of people, but a lot of the people that I've worked with, a lot of people that I know, over the years and stuff like that, the draw in is often that sense of belonging, that sense of family. These groups, in a lot of ways, they fulfill those needs. These are your brothers and sisters in the struggle. These are your brothers and sisters in the fight. And the way I had organized the National Socialist Movement too. It appealed highly to people that had been in the military, that had come out or retired or done their time there, because they were searching for that sense of camaraderie, a group to fight with, something to be a part of. And so at that point, I'm structuring the group in a military style fashion. It was set up in a lot. It was a state nonprofit, so it had a board of directors. Board of directors, and but structurally, it was organized more like a paramilitary with ranks and structure like that. So it wasn't a democracy, and the way the organization was set up was more like a dictatorship. So some of the groups are set up like family units in, like, say, the skinhead culture, which is much smaller now than it used to be, but it still exists. A lot of those would call themselves skinhead families. And I can tell you that, like, when I was involved, when I was running NSM for all those years, girls that I was dating, like, one after another, they're saying that if they weren't part of the movement, I mean, like, girls from outside of the organization, they'd come around and they'd say, like, man, you're like a cult leader. This is a cult. This is weird, or this is strange, and you're like a cult leader, and you're different when you're at these events, like, well, of course, I'm going to be different than I would be at home. But the interesting part of that story is that, like, one after another, and these girls don't know each other, one after another, they're saying, this is a cult. So at the time, that's making me angry. I'm like, why are these girls keep saying this stuff? I'm making these bad choices, and women had nothing to do with them. I was the one that couldn't see it. Everybody else could see it, but I can't see it. So that's really telling for people that are involved in this type of thing, is they don't see it. They don't believe that they're part of the cult. They believe they're part of this grand cause, this noble cause, and they're going to do good things in the world. And that's the same mindset I had. So it wasn't this like thought out plan, like, I'm going to manipulate people, I'm going to do all these terrible things and take advantage of that. It was totally ideological, and the belief that fighting for something positive and good. And it was the same process when it came to breaking free from it. It was like, well, I don't believe in this anymore. It's not right. It's not good for society. It's not good for our country. So I can no longer align with it, even though it would have been easier to stay, because you had that perceived power, you had that influence, you had, my job was involved in it. Everybody I knew was involved in it. So just about.
Of course, uh, that is a neurotypical reason for being in, because I personally also know people, you could call it a neurotypical perspective, and then the ASPD perspective, who are actually in it because they believe in superiority, and not that they are necessarily doing something good for the society, but they believe in the rule of the superior. And they don't really care about what is fair and moral. They just believe in the clash of nations, and their nation and their race happens to be the superior one, and to hell with morality and all the other inferior races.
What psychologically makes a person feel that way, though? Right? Like, why do they want to be part of something that's to oppress or hold down other people? I did come across that when I was involved in the movement, and those kind of people, I felt like some of that is bordering along sociopathic or psychopathic type behavior. When your sole goal in life is to, like, oppress or hold down somebody else, there's some other kind of mental damage in there, some kind of breakage that's not normal. So actually, from a leadership standpoint, I was watching out for those kind of people, because I did cross paths with them, and they made me nervous, because I typically felt like this is somebody that we would call like a loose cannon, somebody that might go off, break ranks, and do something illegal. And now we were coming from this moral standpoint, like, don't do something illegal, but do something illegal, you're going to damage the group. And the group was number one. It was ahead of anybody, friendships, anything else like that. So the protecting the group and defending the group was number one. So if people were coming along and didn't want to follow orders, or were doing things that jeopardized the group, that was a threat to the group. And some people would be thrown out if they were violating the rules too much.
Even you would kick them out. What is actually what makes extremism very powerful, I've noticed, is that it actually reverses the usual order of persuasion. So, in like healthy political discourse, people adopt ideas and then build communities around them. But in an extremist movement, people join the community first and only later adopt the ideas required to remain inside it. So, like in extremism, extremism rarely persuades people intellectually. It attaches itself to them, to their emotional needs first, like belonging and identity and dignity. And then only afterwards it provides the ideology to justify the attachment, basically. So in this case, you could ask, what could the same psychological could the same psychological mechanism radicalize people in a completely different ideological direction? Because in your book you talked about how sometimes when you exit like a far right movement, people automatically assume, okay, well now he's Antifa, now he's on far left. There could be something to it because they don't know if you've actually worked on your personality not being prone to ideology, because there is something that should switch inside of you where you don't just grab onto something that's gonna, I mean, there are people whose psychological state is actually suited to join an extremist movement, rather be this or that. Is just about belonging and about having an identity. So someone who exits something that is extreme can very easily dig into something that is also an extreme. So they basically fall into their own trap. You know what I mean?
Very well stated. I mean, and that's exactly, and a lot of people don't see that, and that's something that I saw when I first got out as well. Is first of all, there was people that had flipped from being in neo-Nazi type movements to being into Antifa and going to the far left. So, like when I first left, and I put out, well, first I retired early in 2019, and that was a tactical move because I knew I was going to speak out, but I had no idea what that looked like. I didn't know. I hadn't spent any time in the civilian world at all. I'd been at war with the world all ever since I was a teenager. So I didn't know what that looked like, but I knew I knew the moment I started speaking out, threats and things like that would come in. So and I wasn't ready to speak out immediately. So by the time I was, which was August, September, something like that of the same year, then I start speaking out, and that was the biggest question. The most common question I got from people reaching out was, "So you left the movement, now you're a communist, now you're Antifa." And I thought, man, what in the world am I saying that's making people think this? Because I'm definitely not pro-communist, never have been, never will be, and I'm not on the even on the left. So why are they thinking this? You know, and I had to put myself back in that mindset and say, Jeff, every time someone left the movement, you also thought that when you were involved. So there's two reasons for that. Some people actually do it, like you said, the psychological mechanisms are prone to that. So sometimes, and that's not a de-radicalized individual. If somebody flips from one extreme to another, they're not de-radicalized. So quickly, I'm meeting. You know, first of all, I'm jumping all over the place here, but I'm saying with the people that were asking that, I talked to them and said, "Hey, what makes you think that?" Or "No, I'm not." You know, and if people that leave the movement, you don't have to do that. And they were always, it seemed like they were surprised by that. Like, "Oh, wow, really?" You know, like, yeah, you just, you know, of course, you can be anywhere on the political spectrum. Just don't be out on these extremes. And a lot of them, you know, left with me. It came out soon after, or I've listened to the things I've been saying since I've been out, and it's still constantly pulling people out under that trajectory. But what's interesting, and I think a lot of your listeners might find this interesting as well, is since doing this work, you know, helping other people disengage and disengaging myself, you start meeting people from other extremist groups. I met ex-Antifa people. Of course, I was well known in the movement, so many movement people, and then also met people from like Al Qaeda, ex-ISIS members, and things like that, and finding out their stories and their trajectories, the psychological holds between all forms of extremism are almost identical. The ideological, political, religious, all over the place, but the psychological holds the same.
Yeah. What was the backlash that you mentioned when you left the movement? Were you receiving threats? How did the former allies react to that? Are you still actually? Are they still? You still reaching out?
Yeah, there's still people reaching out, but once in a while, like when I'm on television or something like that, some more threats will come in here and there. But typically, like from the organization that I was with, there was, as far as I know, I mean, a lot of the threats are anonymous. They're coming in from blocked numbers or emails under some handle that don't know who it is. A lot of threats are that way, so it's like you just brush it off and say whatever. But so I don't know if too many people were from the organization, but I got some strange ones too. Like there was one guy I remember, and he was like, I watched your videos, and it was never a member or anything. He was just like, I watched your videos for 20 something years. How could you do this to us? It's like, man, this guy wasn't even invested. Why is he angry? So it's like they just feel like that's your duty, and you should have just kept. I should have just kept going in the minds of some of them.
Were you using psychological tricks to recruit people? And if so, which ones?
Um, I mean, intentionally, like, did I learn how to be a cult leader or did I learn how to do these things? No, I mean, but you learn as you go, type of thing, and there is a lot of subconscious things I think that people do that are involved in this stuff. But really, it's just like tapping into these human needs and what people are looking for. So, like the organization that I was a part of, it was I noticed one of the things that a lot of people bickered and fought over was religion. So it's like religion needs to be a side issue in this organization because we had 40%, 45% Christian, 45% pagan, and then 5-10% other religions. So I saw that becoming a source of divisiveness, and basically said, religion's got to be for church and home, and you should not proselytize other people, try to recruit them to your religion. But at the same time, the group was passing out, had some Christian-based literature and other things like that that might appeal to those people. So you would twist the narrative to recruit different types of people and bring them in.
Did you study propaganda messaging in when you were on the leadership position?
I mean, I studied like how Goebbels handled things and how different, tacticians and throughout history, like Sun Tzu's Art of War is something that I found pretty fascinating. There's a lot that can be Machiavelli, the Prince. There's different things that one can study. We don't want to give out too many hints. We don't want guys picking up these books and learning how to do it.
The Goebbels, actually, he was a master. I think he said that if you very large lies can be more believable than the small ones because people assume something so extreme could not possibly be true. I think Hitler also wrote extensively about it in his book. Although it's also good for people because now they know what to avoid. Because propaganda is used, it's not only used for extremist movements, propaganda is used for, I mean, you see it everywhere. You see it for food, alcohol, drinks, all the type of stuff, right? I think Hitler, I think he also said that in order for propaganda to work right, you focus on just a few points and then repeat them indefinitely because people don't really have like the mental capacity to take in too much information. So you basically do like a simple, repetitive, and emotionally charged things. Yeah, so reading a copy of your book, it did seem, as you mentioned before, that the movement operated almost like a military structure with a chain of command and training manuals. Um, and I know that also the informants became so common that you basically were trying to detect spies. And you also before mentioned that you also infiltrated into other groups. How did you do that? What was the process of placing your little spies into other groups or movements?
Ooh, I don't think I've been asked that before on a podcast, as far as like how we did it. as far as like the other groups and stuff, and I detailed some of the infiltrators in my book, but there was so many over the years, like an entire book, an encyclopedia could be written on just the people that were informants, and those are the ones we actually knew and uncovered, because in the movement everyone calls everyone a dang informant. It's like, oh, that guy. You could have a clan leader split off from another clan because over a girl or something, or over some kind of minor drama, power struggle, and all of a sudden the other guy is called a fed or an informant or something like that. It's like one of the most common accusations now. So it's thrown around so lightly that you know you could suspect somebody of being a Fed, but I saw that early on, and I was like, man, you can't just label people like that. Like, we could be like trashing good people here just because they acted a little different, asked a weird question, or something like that. So I demanded like evidence. So for some of them, we had people that would tip us off in police departments or things like that. We'd look up criminal records. We would see if they testified in court against somebody else, anything like that, or any really strange things like a lot of criminal convictions and not doing any time or doing very little time. Those were telling, because you're not going to pull up somebody's record and it's not going to say informant across it. That just didn't happen. So we had to get actual evidence, but there's just a handful in there that were covered. But to the second part of your question, how we infiltrated Antifa early on, even before they were being called Antifa over here, they were called Anti-Racist Action. They started up in Minnesota, where I'm from, and they were infiltrating ARA and whatever their other factions were called, were infiltrating, and the first real big infiltration came when we were holding a press conference in downtown St. Paul, and it ended up in this big street fight. So I was like, after that, um, got to figure out ways to infiltrate them. And I would say the most successful person that we had that infiltrated the other side was a non-white person, was somebody that was black, that got very close to the top leadership in Antifa here, and they had no idea because they didn't suspect that. They suspected. So we had to have people that didn't like have racial tattoos if white people were doing it, but our most successful infiltrators were people that weren't white.
When you were infiltrating, what type of information would you try to gather, or would you just try to do as much damage as possible inside the group somehow?
Well, it was a sort of a two-pronged approach. So one was for information and gathering. So they're logging the names of everybody they could find that was involved in there, because in this um, the way that these organizations think is like, well, one day we're going to be in power, so we need to know who our enemies are. So they were compiling lists of enemy troops basically there. And the second reason for infiltrating was to um, put in false information, because they were infiltrating our organization and had a number of times successfully. So it was to put misinformation in there. So there was other little tricks that were being done to do that as well. Like when they'd have tip lines or things like that, we'd say, hey, here's an anonymous tip. The Nazis are going to be meeting. And then we give them a address on the other side of town. They knew we were coming because we did press releases and we announced where we were coming to. So before that, you had to do like security checks. You'd have to meet somewhere, have your people that were vetted. So anybody that was coming, say we were showing up in, we'll just say St. Louis, and somebody could say, hey, I'm a independent white nationalist from St. Louis. I'd like to come to your rally. I said, well, if we'll send our people out that are in the area to meet you in advance. Like if they contacted us last minute, they're not getting in because we don't know who they are, unless somebody from another allied organization could vouch for them and say, yes, so and so is our member, we vouch for them. Then we weren't letting them in. So a lot of times independents were not allowed to get into events because the infiltration. So we were doing the same thing, sending people, sending false messages into these groups to get them to go run to the other opposite side of town and do little things like that to throw them off of our tail.
Those are the little things. Do you remember what was the most large consequences type of infiltration act that you guys did, or something that's like very memorable that you still remember, or that was done to you, to your group, by Antifa or what have you?
Boy, there's so many crazy things that happened over the years. Well, when we got infiltrated one time, this was back in the '90s, and it was an assassination attempt on my life. So
Yeah, that's memorable.
yeah, right. You don't forget that sort of thing. Plus, I got a scar across the back of my head to this day from that. But they were infiltrated. There was two of them. It was my roommate and I, and we had went down to a different part of the state in Rochester, which is way in the southern part of the state of Minnesota. And we had went down there, and it was a new recruit that was hanging around us, and I thought he was a little off, but like a couple of times we'd go out in the woods and stuff at night with him, and he'd get real nervous, and he'd be like, "You guys gonna jump me?" I'm like, "Why do you think we're gonna jump you? Why, you know?" I just thought the guy was a coward or something, you know, and but I wasn't sure because I always wanted proof, you know. You didn't just run on suspicions because you could end up throwing out people that were legit and loyal. But this guy was dropping little hints that something was off about him, but I wasn't sure yet. And he shows up, you know, so it was just going to be the three of us. We're going to go down and do this pass out literature in this town. And he brings another guy over, and we had never met before, and this guy was something was wrong with him, and but he went with us, passed out literature. Long story short, and we get back, and I'm reaching down into the trunk of the car to grab out this box of magazines and CDs and T-shirts and things like that that we had brought along from a record label that I was working with at the time, and when I bent down into the trunk, they hit me across the back of the head with tire irons that were here to kill you. And at that point, I put my hand across the back of my head, and the whole scalp was hanging. It was like it felt like a sponge. So you don't forget that sort of thing. I just remember staggering backwards and thinking, "What?" And I didn't see it coming, and staggering backwards. And then my roommate, he tells me later, because I see this guy swinging this tire iron at my roommate, and I'm just kind of standing there like, what the heck, trying not to pass out from the blood loss and the all that. And he had blocked the next hit with his arm, otherwise I would have been killed for sure.
Tell me about the member named Pat.
There's two stories about that one. I'm trying to think of what I put in the book, but there was a guy that was going by Pat. Wasn't his real name, but that's what we knew him as. And the first time when we were still in, he was still in Minnesota at the time, and he had. This is the Nazis and Hamas chapter. This one is actually in the book. They're both in the book actually, but he had said that he had run into somebody from Hamas that was interested in supporting the movement. And I thought, oh, this is a little strange, but we had some flyers that were like pro PLO and the enemy of our enemy is our friend type of thing. So we went and met with this guy, and in a shopping mall, like in a coffee area in the mall. Um, I sensed right away something was wrong because when I shook the guy's hand, it was like sweaty, wet. I mean, wet, not just like damp, but wet, wet. And I was like, "Oh, this something's odd with this guy." And he keeps looking up, like up at in the upper floors of the mall. He keeps looking up over and over and over again. And the guy that's with me goes, "What, you got some friends up there? Why do you keep looking up there? What's up?" And he's like, "Oh, no, 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 no." And he starts asking about safe houses to put Hamas members in and things like that, and that they could fund us and all this kind of stuff. I thought, this is a setup. Something's not right with this. I told him, I said, we don't do any illegal activities. We sympathize with your plight, but we don't get involved in that. And he starts getting more and more nervous and kind of trying to push the issue. And my colleague that was with me, he finally says, apparently you don't hear well. We said we're not interested in what you're selling. We're not interested in that. And it was basically goodbye, and we left. And we thought, are we going to get grabbed by the feds or whoever as we're leaving the mall? It didn't happen. but also we didn't agree to anything. So I believe that they tried to entrap us at that moment, for sure. And we didn't take the bait, because we saw it for what it was, and we weren't going to fall for that. So that's one thing that guy did. Um, but we never suspected him, because he just said, this was somebody he met in a store, and we didn't think anything of it because he had been with us for a while. Early on in the early 90s, and this was more in the 2000s, but in the early 90s, informants that would come along from the government, they would almost automatically like ask you to do illegal things or participate in illegal activities. So it's easy to pick those people out. They got more complex in times. And I back in the 90s, I always said we're going to find an informant within 3 to 6 months. That's the very longest that they will last. um that changed. Years later, you would have people that were undercover for years, and that guy was never a problem in the organization, had been with us for I don't know how many years, but several years. And then that incident happened, and then there was another incident with the same guy. He had relocated to Arizona and got involved in um I don't know all the details, but there was somebody else that wasn't a party member, but had gotten involved with this individual, supposedly about planting like IEDs on the border, because we did border patrols in the Southwest states, and supposedly they were going to do something with IEDs, and that resulted in some arrests.
You guys in the US have a debt that has grown to 1 trillion in the past 3 months, while your economy only grew by 5.5 trillion in the past 3 years. How's that one for you? I can offer you a degree of safety against inflation. You can now be less miserable about the prices, which seem to always rise more than expected, as the inflation just won't go away. Look, the government isn't going to take care of you, so forget the protests and do it yourself. Take matters into your own hands is what successful people do. I decided to help my audience shelter their assets and diversify them into gold, which is something that has always been used by the rich to preserve wealth throughout the history. Birch Gold Group makes the process straightforward. They can help you convert your existing IRA or a 401k account into a tax advantage physical gold IRA without any of the out pocket costs. Just text Captainese to 989898 and receive their free info kit on gold IRAs that is packed with insider information on how gold and silver can protect your savings. I've checked out their references before partnering with them, and their endorsements include Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, and Ron Paul, and I trust these people. With an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, Gold now has 5-star reviews and thousands of happy customers. Birch Gold Group is the nation's #1 gold IRA provider. To learn more, text Captainese to 989898 and claim your free info kit on gold IRAs. You also have the link in the description below.
There is a Telegram group. It's called Track a Nazi. It's basically Russians and their informants. And what they do is they will post, it's like an online informant group, which is something that's even more scary, I guess. And they basically post as many informations about every soldier that fought in Ukraine, and that is like basically infantry, almost specifically. But I saw a few drone guys also. That is a foreigner, and I'm not sure if man, I should check, but my account was actually blocked, so there's definitely something going on there. I was yeah, they're gathering information on us now, which is like an online version of what you're talking about, which is pretty interesting. Were you at that point, were you paranoid someone may come for you, or I mean, well, you were the leader, so you were the ones that they would be like, it would be a thing to go for you and to do something. I said, well, at that time you didn't have a family or anything, right? You didn't have no one to like really be afraid for.
No, I mean, I did. I mean, depending on the year, but like I had raids on my home twice. Once in Minnesota, once in Detroit, and my kids were real young on the raid in Minnesota when that took place, and that was a no knock warrant. They kicked the SWAT team kicked the doors in. They didn't identify themselves as police when they came in. So I'm thinking in my mind it's the Mossad or something, like I'm thinking, oh, do I, charge these people? Do I fight? Like if they're not identifying themselves as police, I'm gonna charge. This could be like the Alamo. So when they came in, they're smashing the doors in. They came in with assault rifles with the flashlights on the end of the guns, full body armor, face masks, the whole works, like full body armor. And they're like, put your hands up. I'm like, who the F are you? Uh, because I'm trying to make the decision if I'm going to charge these people or if it's the police, I'm going to surrender. So then they're like, police, get your hands up. I'm like, oh, okay. And then I surrendered at that point. But my kids saw, they were pretty small at that point. It was like 4 a.m. in the morning. They had school the next morning, and yeah, it was. Um, that's some of the collateral damage that happens when you're involved in this kind of stuff. And what's ironic about that is, from a leadership perspective, I had seen other organizations. I saw what happened when Aryan Nations was having their legal troubles and things like that. The membership left. Like, I mean, not all of them, but like a huge percentage of the membership just took off, like left. And I thought, learning from leadership experience and from watching others and seeing how others ran their organizations, I saw how that loyalty flickered real lightly the second the leaders got in trouble. So I didn't say anything about either one of the raids. My inner circle, the top leaders in the organization, they knew about it, and I'm talking like maybe 5 people max. That way, if something happened to me, if I was arrested, killed, anything else like that, then the organization could continue. But other than that, they were sworn to secrecy, and nobody in the ranks knew about it because we didn't want to have that kind of blowback on the organization. So like I said, the organization was always first, not the individuals.
I mean, in a twisted way, I mean, it's gonna sound wrong, but you're actually a great leader, man. If this was an organization that was about something else more positive, you would have great leadership of that organization. Really, really, you actually did a good job. It's just that the basis, the contents of the organizations were off. Everything else was just fine. Your family never did try to pull you out, like do an intervention or something?
They did, I mean, they tried everything. My grandfather, even, that had been in the war, he had said to me, he says, Jeff, the path that you're on is going to lead to one of two places, prison or death. And I'd said to him, I said, you might have surrendered, but I'll never I'll never stop fighting for my people. And I was very disrespectful about it. And before that, my parents had tried for years to reach me, and nobody could reach me. So like different things were happening when I got doxxed early on, and other things like that. All the pressure that was put on me by the system, my involvement in this stuff wrecked my mom's career. She was an attorney. She was elected to be a judge. The governor of the state wouldn't sign off on her judgeship because of her father, and then me being involved in the movement. So my involvement, wrecked my mom's career. It caused all kinds of pressure on my family. Law enforcement visits to my father. My sister got threats at school. Stuff. My kids were treated a certain way. Different things. It was the life I would not wish on anybody.
Yeah. Well, you placed more value on one day living as a lion than a lifetime of a sheep, right? That's what that was the basically a collateral damage to something.
I've said that exact quote. Y-
What made you get out of it, though? When did you start thinking this is something you might want to get out of? Because if it wasn't your mom losing a job, if it's not your sister receiving threats, what is it then?
So all the pressure over the years. I mean, I had police threatened to shoot me. I had assassination attempts. I had informants that had come in. Raids on my home. All these kind of things. Those things every single one of them entrenched me further. It made me want to fight harder. It was like, okay, if the government's going to come after my family, guess what? I'm going to fight 10 times harder. You're going to come, FBI is going to come knock on my door, start asking me questions, try to entrap me in something. Guess what? I'm going to recruit 1,000 times more people. I'm going to do more. I'm going to strike back. I'm going to build this up more and more powerful. That's the way my whole entire life was like this vicious circle that went like that. So every lash of the proverbial whip drove me further into that entrenchment. So what it was that got me out was seeing the humanity in the people that I'd once vilified. So in 2016, I had met, I was asked to be part of this film, and I didn't really know much about it. I was just like, okay, I'll pretty much show up in anything, any film, any TV news show, except Jerry Springer, because he was clown show. I didn't want to be part of that. And but just about anything else, I would check it out. So filmmaker called me up, asked, will you come and participate in this film? I looked it up. I said, this is a legitimate company. Okay, I'll be part of it. I didn't know I was meeting Daryl Davis. Daryl Davis is an African American black man that is known for pulling people out of the Ku Klux Klan. And so I show up at this diner in Montgomery, Alabama. It's where Hank Williams wrote the song "Hey Hey Good Looking." It was a music cafe, and I was sitting outside on the bench with my girl at the time, and this big black man steps out of a vehicle, walks towards me, and says, "Hi, I'm Daryl Davis. You must be Jeff Schoep." And so I got up, I shook his hand. I thought, man, I know this guy's face from somewhere, and I know that name, but I couldn't quite place it because I was just thinking about, the things I was going to say in the debate or in the interview. And by the time we sat down, we're talking about music. I had been in a long-haired rock and roll band, if you can even believe that, before, early on in the movement. And I quit that when all that stuff happened with my mom's career. I didn't want to ruin my band's career, so I shaved my head and put all my dedication into the movement at that time. But so I'm sitting there, where Daryl and I are talking about music and all these different things, and I'm realizing the cameras are rolling, and I'm getting along with this guy pretty well, like two old friends that just run into each other, and it clicked. I was like, I know who this guy is. He's the person that gets people out of these hate groups. So now I'm thinking, boy, I better step up. I better step it up here. So I like pound my fist on the table and say, you know what, Daryl, I'll fight to the last bullet for my people. And he didn't react. Instead, he just starts sharing with me about um, how racism affected him as a child, and how he was being pelted with rocks by white adults in a Boy Scout parade as a child. So I'm hearing this story, and I'm seeing in real time, like I'm seeing the human being sitting across from me, and I'm thinking about how he was treated as a child. I'm thinking about my own kids. I'm thinking about, there's all kinds of cognitive dissonance going on in my mind where I'm going, oh, well, that's not my group. I wouldn't have done that. My people would have never done something like that to a kid, trying to place it in a box and say, well, that's not our group. Maybe some groups do things like that, but our group doesn't do that, because it bothered me. It bothered my conscience. Like, this is all of a sudden, it's not this noble cause that I thought it was, because I'm seeing the real life pain that it's causing in somebody that's sitting across from me, and nobody ever approached me like that in all those years. Not my family wouldn't have thought to do that. They didn't have those experiences or stories, and I had never really sat down with the so-called other side until then. So I'd say Daryl planted the first seed. Also, when I moved here to Detroit, white people are the minority here. And I assumed immediately that I'd be having like all these fights and battles with black people and others. And it didn't really turn out that way. Most of the violence, the vast majority of the violence I experienced over the years was from white people. So that was interesting too. But having these experiences living here, meeting Daryl Davis, so that's when the shift is starting to happen. I didn't break free right away from it. I felt like I can fix this. I'm going to call this is a white civil rights organization. That's when I started saying a lot of that stuff around that period of time. And I tried to shift the public image of the movement. At one point, we dropped the swastika from public view anyways, and we're using an odal rune. The group today is very small, but they brought back the swastika after I left. So I was making changes to try to reflect my change in it, but it was basically putting lipstick on a pig. You can put lipstick on a pig, but it still ain't pretty.
When your mind was the most radicalized at your lowest level, or well, highest in your mind, what would be, if you could imagine the utopia, if your goal has been achieved, you've achieved the goals that you want to achieve with this organization, how would the society look like?
Well, it would have been an all-white National Socialist Society. So that's basically, so anybody that wasn't white would have been deported. Anybody that was homosexual wouldn't be there. Anybody that had mixed race or anything like that wouldn't have been there. It would have been a all-white homeland that was just National Socialist, preferably. That's the way I looked at it back then.
Homeland meaning the United States.
The United States or part of it, like I mean a lot of times the movement would be like, well, we'll probably only be able, it'll balkanize like the former Yugoslavia, that maybe we will just be given a part of the country, and then from there we would expand later and take back the whole country maybe, but that was off down the road type of thinking. So that wasn't a very realistic goal, but this is the mindset of the movement.
Yeah, at least because you need to at least trade with other countries in order to have a very good economy. Usually, unless then you would have to really take on a lot of shifts in order to make this in a solely white, closed society, the United States.
But then we would say things like, "Oh, well, we'll trade with the other countries." We would say things like we trade with the other countries and things like that. But I mean, again, it just wasn't a very realistic goal. But sorry, I cut you off.
No problem. But it wasn't realistic, at least not because at least you need to bring in some scientists that may happen to be Africans for at least a few months, and there you go. It's difficult. It's difficult. So I think that every time people read a program, and it's not just about extremist groups, it's also about political parties or whatever. The programs usually, I am more afraid that has everything look utopic. We are against hunger. We are going to make everyone equal, but it's vague and abstract. It doesn't really say what they're going to do specifically. I am more afraid of that because I know they were not thinking and they're more driven by the ideology and power than actually like the actual strategy and the plan, right? As opposed to a program that has some things wrong. It has some errors that I don't like, but at least tells you what they're going to do. So anyway, so today you are basically so you work with the SWC, the Simon Wiesenthal Center. I didn't pronounce that right. English is not my native language, guys. And you basically teach people about radicalization and how to leave hate groups. So tell us a little bit about what you do today, even though I just said it. But yeah, what is your work?
Yeah, so when I left the movement, then I started speaking out, and Simon Wiesenthal Center reached out to me, and I met with them, and that was really interesting because I didn't really know a whole lot about them other than Simon Wiesenthal. These were people that would go after Nazi war criminals and things like that. It's the only thing I knew about Wiesenthal. I didn't realize that they were involved in like educational endeavors and things like that. So today I speak at schools all over the country. I talk with young people about not getting involved in all forms of extremism. I don't focus on just far right because all forms of extremism kind of lead to the same place, and they're all very 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 negative. So a lot of times I'm speaking at inner city schools as well. So I talk about getting involved in cults, gangs, far left, far right, all these different kind of things, and how to kind of inoculate young people from that sort of thinking, and use my story as basically like, this is something that a lot of people that I knew that over the years, they didn't make it. They were killed. They took their own lives. They went to prison. Lots of negative things can happen to you in an extremist organization, and depending on the group, it could be even worse. So, we try to inoculate kids against that sort of making those poor choices, and even, getting involved in gangs. Now, gangs a little different than extremism. Extremism is typically ideological driven. Gangs sometimes, is criminal, and it's usually criminal. Those type of trajectories, but kids don't think about things like, hey, a rival, you might make this choice, but a rival gang could come and shoot up your mom's house or your little sister or something like that, and they don't think about that sort of thing. So I focus on things like that, and try to make sure that young people don't go down this dark path. And then in, I think it was 2020, I formed a nonprofit organization called Beyond Barriers, and that was also to help support people that are coming out of extremist groups, cults, gangs, and give them some support, because I sure didn't have much support when I left. And it's a difficult road for people. So a lot of times it's important for them to have somebody to talk to, or just basically say, like, hey, you can do this, like, it's going to be all right, and you're going to be you know it's a better path for you, like, find something else, a new mission, a new purpose in life, and not go down that dark path.
Well, what would you say to someone who is in a neo-Nazi group today, right now, as it is, and maybe not someone who tries to leave, someone who is convinced that this is what they're in, this is for the greater good, and this is where they're gonna stay? Or can you even try to say something to that person that you would have optimism enough to believe that in time, when they think about it, they're gonna maybe start shifting to the other side?
Every case is different, and with different people there's different things. And I can tell you, like, the first case that I'd worked on was a young man that was, it sounded like I was talking to myself at his age, because he was like, I know you left, and I'm willing to talk to you, and I'm curious why, and all these kind of things. And it was very respectful conversation. But he is like, and so I was explaining to him, these are the sort of things that you can expect, and these are the sort of things that you can have with your life that could happen. And I used my own story as an example, because he wanted to hear that anyways. So I was like, look, dude, the chances of you making it are not good, like, it's a miracle that I'm here today. And he's like, I think I might just do like you did, I'll be in the movement for 20 something years, and then I'll retire. And I'm like, dude, you missed the point. You're probably not gonna make it.
It's not a career, man.
But that's not, yeah, like, don't take my path. That's not the point of what I was trying to say. And then he goes, well, I know that you don't believe in this anymore, but he says, let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the cause is right, and that he's right and I'm wrong. He goes, my life means nothing, because the cause means everything. And that's where I just went, oh man, this is like talking to myself at that age. And I got, and I kind of ran into it felt like a little bit of a roadblock, because it felt like everything I was trying to reach this young man wasn't working. So after that conversation, I talked to one of my old security guys that had been in the movement with me, and I started telling him the story. I said, how would you handle this? Like, here's what happened. And halfway through the conversation, he's like, oh my God, dude, that was us. That's how we talked when we were, in the movement at that age. And we kind of ran into this roadblock with this. And that was, so then I started realizing, you're not going to reach everybody by telling them about the roadblocks and the things that are wrong, because that didn't reach me. So that might work with some people, but really it's the most successful process that we use is called relational dialogue. And that's the process that I had learned from Daryl Davis, not telling somebody that they're wrong, but showing them. And there's another part of my story as well, where I had met a Muslim filmmaker soon after meeting Daryl, and she engaged in that similar process. Not intentionally, that was just her authentic self. Daryl had been doing this for a long time, and it was intentional with how he would engage with people. But I call it relational dialogue, and that's basically not telling people that they're wrong, but showing them how they're wrong, and helping them see the humanity of the people that they had once dehumanized. Because that was life altering for me, and it doesn't work on every single person, but it's the most successful method that I've seen is in how to reach people and change hearts and minds has to do with that relational dialogue.
How do you facilitate this dialogue? Do you find people, do people reach out to you, say they want to talk to a neo-Nazi, or how does that happen? How do you make them talk to each other?
Typically, we utilize it. They reach out to us. So like we don't go and wouldn't go like show up at a rally or something and then try to engage with people there. That typically doesn't work, especially if you're in your peer group and all that. It's not gonna that's not gonna work. You're just gonna butt heads and not get anywhere. So usually it's people when they reach out to us, we're not going and trying to push people into, if it's the same thing. Like if someone would have told me you're wrong, get out of this. No way, I'm not listening to that. Most people don't. So you have to kind of show them how they're wrong. So a lot of times why they reach out is because they're curious. So it started with, like I said earlier in the program, are you a communist? Are you Antifa now? They're asking me those questions. And instead of getting mad about it or upset, I would just say, why do you think that? Or let's talk about this. And no, I'm not, by the way. And then they would feel comfortable because having somebody that's come out of that life that was legit involved for all those years, it's like street cred in a way. So it's like if you're an alcoholic and you go to Alcoholics Anonymous, you might have a doctor that's up there telling you, look, this is what extreme alcoholism can do to your body. Everybody's tuned out because they don't want to hear the doctor. But if you got a ex-alcoholic that's up there and he's like, I used to drink every single day and I beat this, everybody in that room is tuned in because that's somebody that understands them and their journey and has been through it. So they're willing to listen. So that's one of the I think advantages that I have is that a lot of times people will reach out with that curiosity, and they're trying to figure it out. But if they have that curiosity, that means that there's something something inside is telling them, you know what, maybe this is the wrong path, or maybe there's a better way. And so we're trying to show them that there is a better way.
So you pick your battles, which is more effective. I'm not talking to a wall. They say, don't cast pearls before swine, right? Out of all places, you chose Detroit. How come?
Huh. Why Detroit? Well, when I was in the movement, I would tell people, I said, well, I moved to Detroit because it's the front lines and I want to be in the front lines of the fight. And that was true too. But the underlying reason for moving to Detroit was a girl. So, that's the reality of it. So I framed it as it was the front lines, but there was actually a girl
And
behind
it
that.
is the front line also. Well, the front line would be Sudan, so Liberia. It's like Monrovia would be the front line. You were like a second line or something. Well, I'm assuming that someone who is not interested in changing their perspective is not gonna click on the episode anyway. So you know what I mean?
I think you're gonna have you probably if you have people that are neo Nazis in the audience, I think some of them might watch it out of curiosity. And we're gonna see what this person, this SOB is gonna say about this. Like let's hear what he has to say. And so I think you get a lot of curiosity out of it. It's an interesting story.
Do you think that those who watch it because of curiosity, do you think there is any chance of them starting to shift their mind or no?
I think so because like I would have never, if anybody would have ever told me, even when I was de-radicalizing those last few years when I was in, because we want people to disengage and then we work on de-radicalization. Mine was opposite. I'm de-radicalizing while I'm still in. But if somebody had told me that, I'd been like, those are fighting words. You don't know what you're talking about because they don't recognize that they're in that process of de-radicalizing. So, we don't want to say that to people that are reaching out, but you just kind of show them, talk with them and show them the reasons they're wrong, and the change is gradual. So most change doesn't happen like the snap of a fingers. It takes time. It's about planting seeds once somebody's already radicalized and involved. So sometimes I've had success stories where somebody changes over like one act of kindness or something like that, but it's pretty rare because when you're entrenched, it's easier to stay in that mindset for so many reasons than it's harder. It's more of a challenge to leave. So that's why we try to get people to not go in the first place, so yeah.
Man, all right. Now tell us, where can people find you?
Right here in Detroit. They can find me at jeffschoep.com or beyondbarriersusa.org.
All right. And thank you so much for coming on this podcast. This was great.
Say that, but I do know this.